The courtroom was cold and silent. Captain David Park stood in the center of a white circle, surrounded by alien judges who looked down at him from tall seats. Their faces showed nothing. No anger. No pity. Just cold judgment. David had known this moment was coming. 3 months ago, he had made a choice. A colony of human refugees was under attack by creatures called the Vreks. The Vreks were protected by galactic law. They were classified as a sacred species, too important to harm. But they were killing innocent people, women, children, families who had done nothing wrong. David had killed 17 Vreks to save those refugees. He had not hesitated. He had not asked for permission. And now he would pay the price. The head judge, a tall creature with gray skin and 4 eyes, spoke in a voice like grinding stones. Captain David Park of Earth, you have been found guilty of destroying protected life forms. The punishment is exile. You will be sent to Verac 7. A small sound came from somewhere in the room. David did not turn to look, but he knew what it meant. Verac 7 was a death world, the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. No species had ever survived there for more than 3 weeks. It was not a prison. It was an execution with extra steps. You will be given basic supplies, the judge continued. No weapons. No communication devices. No hope of rescue. May your death serve as a warning to others. David said nothing. There was nothing to say. As guards led him away, a voice called out, "I'm going with him." David turned. Lieutenant Emma Kim pushed through the crowd, her face hard with determination. She had served under David for 5 years. She had been there when he killed the Vreks. She had helped him do it. "You were cleared of charges," David said quietly. "Don't throw your life away." Emma looked at him with steady eyes. "You saved 300 people. If they want to kill you for that, they'll have to kill me too. I volunteer for exile." The judges did not argue. One more human meant nothing to them. They simply added her name to the transport list. 2 days later, David and Emma stood inside a small ship as it descended through thick green clouds. Through the window, they could see Verac 7 for the first time. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Endless jungles covered every piece of land. Trees taller than buildings reached toward the sky. Rivers cut through the green like silver snakes. But David knew what waited below that beauty. Every report, every study, every failed expedition had the same conclusion. Verac 7 was alive, and it was hungry. 14 hours of daylight, Emma said, reading from a small screen. Then 16 hours of darkness. That's when the real predators come out. David checked his pack. They had been given food for 3 days, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, and nothing else. No knives, no fire starters, no shelter materials. The council wanted them to die fast. The ship broke through the clouds, and the jungle rose up to meet them. David could see movement everywhere. Shapes crawling on branches, wings beating in the shadows. Things that were too big to be real. The ship landed in a small clearing. The ramp opened and hot, wet air rushed inside like a living thing. It smelled like copper and rotting plants and something else. Something that made the hair on David's arms stand up. "Last chance to change your mind," David said. Emma picked up her pack. "Shut up and walk, Captain." They stepped onto alien soil together. The ground was soft and damp under their boots. Strange sounds filled the air. Clicks and whistles and deep rumbling calls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Behind them, the ship lifted off without a word of goodbye. In seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the green clouds. They were alone. "We need to find high ground," David said. "Somewhere we can see threats coming." They moved into the jungle carefully. Every step was a lesson. The beautiful blue flowers snapped at them with hidden teeth. The vines that looked like ropes were covered in tiny hooks that cut skin. The ground sometimes gave way to reveal pits lined with something sticky and acidic. Within the first hour, they learned that everything on Verax 7 wanted to kill them. The insects carried poison that made muscles freeze. The small animals that looked harmless had claws that could cut through bone. Even the trees dripped sap that burned like fire. But David and Emma kept moving. They watched. They learned. They remembered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, they found a large tree with a hollow space in its trunk. The opening was small enough to defend, high enough to avoid ground predators, and stable enough to hold their weight. "This will do for tonight," David said. They climbed inside and blocked the entrance with branches and leaves. It was not perfect, but it was something. In the growing darkness outside, they could hear the jungle changing. The daytime sounds faded away. New sounds took their place. Deeper sounds. Hungrier sounds. Something massive moved past their tree. David could feel the ground shake with each step. Through a crack in their barrier, he saw a shadow that blocked out the stars. It was bigger than anything that should exist. It sniffed the air once, twice, then moved on. David did not sleep that night. Neither did Emma. They sat back to back, listening to the death world hunt around them. When the first light of dawn finally came, they were still alive. It was not much of a victory, but it was something. "One night down," Emma said, her voice rough with exhaustion. David looked out at the jungle that stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere out there, things were watching them, learning them, deciding if they were worth eating. He smiled grimly. The predators of Verax 7 had hunted countless species to extinction. They had never failed to kill their prey. They had broken every creature that had set foot on this world. But they had never hunted humans before. They had no idea that humans were the most stubborn, most adaptable, most ridiculously persistent species in the galaxy. They had no idea that David Park had not come here to die. He had come here to survive. And God help anything that got in his way. "Let's move," he said. "We have a lot to learn." They climbed down from their shelter and walked into the jungle. The death world watched them go, curious about these strange new creatures that refused to die when they were supposed to. It would learn to respect them soon enough. 3 weeks had passed since David and Emma landed on Verax 7. 3 weeks of fighting, running, bleeding, and learning. 3 weeks that should have killed them 100 times over. They were still alive. David crouched by a small stream, filling containers with water that would need to be boiled and filtered 3 times before it was safe to drink. His hands were covered in scars now. Small cuts from thorns, burns from acid plants, bite marks from insects that had gotten too close. Each scar was a lesson learned the hard way. Emma sat nearby, sharpening a knife she had made from the bone of something that had tried to eat them on day 8. Her military training had kept her alive, but it was something else that kept her fighting. A stubborn refusal to let this planet win. They had found food sources that did not kill them. Certain roots could be eaten if cooked long enough. Some fruits were safe after the outer skin was removed. They had learned which water was poison and which was merely dangerous. They had built weapons from bones and stones and vines. They had become hunters themselves, but they were not alone in this jungle. David had first noticed them on day 5. Shadows that moved wrong. Eyes that gleamed in the darkness and then disappeared. Something was watching them. Something smart. The Ven. He had read about them in the briefing files before Exile. 7 feet tall. Covered in scales that shifted color with their mood. 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through metal. They were the apex predators of Verax 7, the top of the food chain. The reason no other intelligent species had ever survived here. The Galactic Council classified them as too dangerous for contact, too violent, too alien. They could not be reasoned with, the report said. They could only kill. David was beginning to think the reports were wrong. "They're watching again," Emma said quietly, not looking up from her work. David nodded. He had counted at least 6 different Ven following them over the past week. They never attacked, never came close. They just watched, studied, learned. It was exactly what David would do if strange creatures suddenly appeared in his territory. "They're curious," he said. "That's good. Curious is better than hungry." That night something changed. David had killed a creature called a thornback 2 days before. It was the size of a small truck, covered in armor plates and sharp edges. It had attacked their camp in the early morning, smashing through their barriers like they were made of paper. David had led it into a pit trap he had spent 3 days digging. Sharpened stakes at the bottom did the rest. He had kept the skull as a trophy. Now he walked to the edge of their camp and placed it on a spike, facing the jungle, where he knew the Ven were watching. It was a message. A simple one that any predator would understand. "We killed this. We are not prey. We are hunters too." Emma watched him with raised eyebrows. "You're trying to talk to them." "I'm trying to survive," David said. "And the best way to survive among predators is to make them respect you." The jungle was quiet that night. The Ven did not circle their camp as they usually did. David lay awake, wondering if his message had been received. At dawn, he had his answer. A carcass lay at the edge of their territory. Fresh meat from something large and recently killed. It had been placed there deliberately. Carefully, Emma stared at it. "Is that a gift? Or a test?" David said. "Maybe both." He thought for a long moment. Then he picked up the meat and carried it to their fire. He cooked half of it, eating some and saving the rest. The other half he left at the jungle's edge, prepared the same way the Ven had given it to him. A trade. An exchange. A conversation without words. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th morning, a Ven stepped out of the jungle and stood at the tree line in plain sight. David's heart pounded. He had never seen one so close before. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Its scales were deep green with patterns of gold. Its forearms hung loose at its sides, claws retracted. Its eyes, large and golden, studied David with an intelligence that was impossible to deny. Every instinct told him to run, to fight, to do anything except stand still. He stood still. The Ven tilted its head, watching him. David could see others in the shadows behind it. A whole pack, waiting to see what would happen. Slowly, carefully, David raised his hand in greeting. Then he nodded once, the way he would to a fellow soldier. Respect, recognition, one hunter to another. The Ven stared at him for a long moment. Then it made a sound low and rumbling and turned back into the jungle. The shadows followed it. Emma let out a breath she had been holding. What just happened? David watched the jungle where the Ven had disappeared. I think we just made first contact. Over the next weeks, a strange relationship developed. The Ven pack, led by a scarred female David called the Elder, did not attack them. They did not help them either, but they acknowledged them. Sometimes David would find useful things left at the edge of his territory. Bones that made good tools. Plants that had healing properties. Information, given freely. He always left something in return. Food, interesting objects. Small kindnesses that cost nothing but meant everything. The Galactic Council had said the Ven were monsters. Mindless killers. Impossible to communicate with. The Galactic Council had never tried. Humans were different. Humans had spent their entire history reaching out to things that were different, making alliances with creatures that should have been enemies. finding common ground in the strangest places. David Park was not just surviving on Verac 7 anymore. He was building something. A connection. A bridge between species that had never spoken before. One night, as he sat by the fire with Emma, watching the jungle that had become almost familiar, he allowed himself to feel something like hope. "They're not so different from us," he said quietly. "They hunt. They protect their families. They're curious about new things. They respect strength." Emma smiled tiredly. "You sound like you're planning to stay." David looked up at the alien stars that filled the sky. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council had forgotten about them, written them off as dead. Another failed experiment on the Death World. They had no idea what was growing here. What was possible when humans stopped trying to conquer and started trying to understand. "Maybe I am," he said. The jungle rustled in the darkness. Somewhere close, Van Eyes watched the strange creatures who had refused to die, who had earned something that no outsider had ever earned before. Respect. The Death World was beginning to feel like home. 2 months on Verac 7. 60 days of survival that should have been impossible. David Park stood on a ridge overlooking the jungle that had become his home. Watching smoke rise from the distant tree line, something was wrong. For weeks now, a routine had developed between the humans and the Ven. They lived as neighbors. Not friends exactly, but something close to it. The Elders Pack hunted in their territory, and David and Emma hunted in theirs. Sometimes they shared kills. Sometimes they shared warnings about dangers in the forest. It was peaceful. Strange, but peaceful. The smoke changed everything. "Marauders," Emma said, climbing up beside him. Her face was grim. "I counted at least 30 of them moving through the Western Valley." David had heard stories about the Marauders from watching the Ven, a rival pack, larger and more violent than the Elders group. They did not hunt to survive. They killed to conquer. They pushed into new territories, destroyed everything in their path, and moved on when nothing was left. And now they were coming this way. "They'll hit the Elders' territory first," David said. "Then ours." Emma checked her weapons. She had become deadly over the past months. Bone knives at her belt, a spear across her back, traps she could build in minutes. But even she knew the truth. "We can't fight 30 of them." Not and when. David watched the smoke spread across the horizon. The Marauders were burning the forest as they came, driving prey toward them, destroying everything they could not eat. It was not hunting. It was war. He made his decision. "Stay here," he said. "If I'm not back by nightfall, head north. There's a cave system 3 days' walk from here. You can hide there." Emma grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "Something stupid," David said. "I'm going to talk to the Elder." Walking into Ven territory alone was possibly the most dangerous thing David had ever done. The Elders Pack had accepted him as a neighbor, but that did not make him family. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and he would be dead before he hit the ground. But David understood something important about predators. They respected courage. Running away showed weakness. Walking toward danger showed strength. The jungle grew darker as he moved deeper into Ven territory. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. Pack members tracking his movement, waiting to see what he would do. He kept his hands visible, and his movements slowed after an hour of walking. He found the Elder Dot. She was waiting for him in a clearing, sitting on a fallen log like a queen on her throne. Scars covered her scales, marks from a lifetime of fighting and surviving. Around her, a dozen Ven watched from the shadows. Warriors, hunters, killers. David stopped at the edge of the clearing. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his teeth. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "I know you understand me," he said. "Maybe not my words, but my meaning. So I'm going to tell you something important." He knelt down and picked up a stick. In the dirt, he drew a simple picture. Shapes representing the marauders, arrows pointing toward two circles. The Elder's territory. His own. "They're coming," David said, pointing at the shapes. "For you, for me, for all of us." The Elder studied the drawing with ancient eyes. David could not read her expression, could not tell if she understood or if she was simply deciding how to kill him. Then she made a sound, low and rumbling, like thunder underground. One of her hunters moved forward, dragging something behind them, a body. A marauder scout, already dead. David stared at it. The Elder had known. She had already seen the threat coming. She had been preparing, but she had not attacked yet. She was waiting for him. Understanding hit David like a physical blow. The Elder was smart. Smarter than anyone had given her credit for. She knew her pack could not defeat the marauders alone. She knew the humans could not either. But together, David stood up slowly. He walked to the edge of the clearing, closer to the Elder than any outsider had ever been allowed. Close enough that she could kill him with a single swipe of her claws. He extended his hand. The gesture meant nothing in Ven culture, but the meaning behind it was universal. Partnership, alliance, trust. The Elder looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she reached out with one of her forearms and wrapped her clawed fingers around his forearm. Carefully, gently, without drawing blood. A bond formed in that moment. Not between human and alien. Between hunters. Between survivors. Between two creatures who refused to let the marauders destroy what they had built. David returned to his camp at sunset. Emma was waiting with weapons ready, fear hidden behind a mask of determination. "Well?" she asked. "Are we running?" David smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just signed up for the hardest fight of his life. "We're fighting," he said. "But not alone. The Elder's pack is with us." Emma's eyes widened. "You got them to ally with us? How?" "Same way humans have always made allies," David said. "We found a common enemy. That night, they planned." David drew maps in the dirt, showing terrain and choke points. Emma calculated traps they could build, weapons they could make. The Ven watched from the shadows, their golden eyes following every movement. They had 3 days before the marauders arrived. 3 days to prepare a defense against an enemy that had never been defeated. 3 days to teach the Ven something they had never learned, how to fight a war. David looked at the faces around him, human and alien together for the first time. It was strange and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. But for the first time since landing on this death world, he felt like they might actually win. "Get some sleep," he told Emma. "Tomorrow we start building our army." The jungle was quiet around them. Somewhere in the darkness, the Elder was gathering her hunters, preparing them for what was coming, trusting a human with the fate of her entire pack. The marauders came on the morning of the 4th day, 37 of them, moving through the jungle like a wave of death. Their scales were dark red, the color of dried blood. Their eyes held nothing but hunger and rage. David watched them from his hiding spot in the trees. Beside him, the Elder crouched in silence, her body perfectly still. She had learned quickly over the past 3 days. They all had the battlefield was a section of forest called the Thornwood. David had found it on his 2nd week on Varak 7 and had avoided it ever since. The trees here grew thorns the length of swords. The ground was a maze of roots and holes. The undergrowth was so thick that movement was nearly impossible. It was perfect. The marauders entered the Thornwood expecting easy prey. They found something else entirely. The first trap triggered when their lead scout stepped onto what looked like solid ground. The earth collapsed beneath them, dropping 3 marauders into a pit lined with sharpened stakes. Their screams echoed through the forest. The pack leader roared a command. The marauders spread out, moving more carefully now. But careful movement meant slow movement. And slow movement meant more time in the kill zone. Emma triggered the second wave of traps from her position on the eastern ridge. Ropes snapped. Logs swung down from the canopy. Deadfalls crashed through branches. 2 more marauders fell, crushed beneath weights they never saw coming. Panic began to spread through the enemy pack. They were hunters, not soldiers. They understood chasing prey, not being hunted themselves. This was something new, something terrifying. David gave the signal. The Elders' pack attacked from 3 directions at once. They did not charge blindly, as they might have before David taught them. They struck in coordinated groups, hitting weak points and retreating before the marauders could respond. They used the terrain to their advantage, leading enemies into traps, separating groups from the main pack. It was beautiful and terrible to watch. The Ven were natural killers, but now they were organized killers. Now they were an army. David moved through the chaos with a spear in his hands. He was not as strong as a Ven, not as fast, not as deadly, but he was smart, and he had spent 3 months learning how these creatures fought. A marauder lunged at him from the shadows. David sidestepped, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him, then drove his spear into the soft spot beneath its arm. The marauder fell, and David was already moving, already searching for the next threat. Emma fought nearby, her movements precise and efficient. She had found her place in this battle, not as a frontline fighter, but as a controller. She triggered traps, called out warnings, directed Ven hunters toward isolated enemies. She was the brain while the Ven were the claws. The battle raged for hours. Bodies fell on both sides. The jungle floor grew slick with blood. The air filled with screams and roars and the crash of violence. Slowly, impossibly, the marauders began to lose. They had come expecting weak prey. They had found warriors. They had come expecting fear. They had found fury. And they had no idea how to handle it. As the sun reached its highest point, only a handful of marauders remained. They gathered in a defensive circle, wounded and exhausted, their confidence shattered. At their center stood their leader. He was massive, the largest Ven David had ever seen. Scars covered every inch of his body, marks from hundreds of kills. His eyes burned with hatred as he surveyed the destruction around him. The elder stepped forward to face him. This was how the Ven settled leadership disputes. Single combat. Winner takes all. But David moved first. He walked out of the tree line, spear in hand, and stood between the elder and the marauder leader. The jungle fell silent. Every eye, human and Ven alike, watched him. "This is my fight too," David said, though he knew no one understood his words. "You came from my home, my people, my family." He raised his spear and pointed it at the marauder leader. "Come and take it." The marauder roared and charged. He was twice David's size, 4 times his weight, and built for killing. Every logical calculation, said David, should die in the first second of contact. Logic had never met human stubbornness. David did not dodge, did not retreat. He ran forward, directly at the creature that should have ended his life. At the last moment, he dropped into a slide, passing beneath the marauder's reaching claws. As he slid, he drove his spear upward into the creature's open mouth, angling toward the brain. The marauder's momentum did the rest. The body crashed to the ground, nearly crushing David beneath it. He rolled free, covered in blood, gasping for breath. Around him, the surviving marauders stared in shock. Their leader was dead, killed by a creature half his size, a creature that should have been nothing but food. They ran. The battle was over. David lay on his back, staring up at the sky through gaps in the canopy. Every part of his body hurt. He was fairly certain something was broken. But he was alive. Against all odds, against every prediction, he was alive. A shadow fell over him. The elder stood above him, her golden eyes studying his face. Behind her, the surviving members of her pack gathered. They had lost 7 hunters in the battle. 7 lives that would be mourned, but they had won. They had survived. Together. The elder reached down and pulled David to his feet. Then she did something that made his breath catch in his throat. She pressed her forehead against his dot. He had seen this gesture before, between pack members, between family. It was the highest sign of respect and connection a Ven could offer. The human had become one of them. Around him. The other Ven made sounds of approval, low rumbles that vibrated through the air. Acceptance. Welcome. Home. Emma limped over, a grin spreading across her exhausted face. Did we actually win? David looked at the battlefield around them, at the traps that had saved their lives, at the Ven hunters who had fought beside them, at the jungle that had tried to kill them and had finally accepted them instead. Yeah, he said. I think we did. That night, they built a fire at the edge of the thornwood. Ven and humans sat together, sharing food and warmth. The elder sat beside David, watching the flames dance. No words were spoken. None were needed. They had faced death together and survived. They had bled for each other, killed for each other. And in doing so, they had become something new. Not human. Not VHN.pack. 1 year had passed since David Park was sent to die on Verac 7. The Galactic Council transport descended through the green clouds, responding to a signal that should not have existed. The automated beacon David had repaired 6 months ago was still broadcasting, still calling for attention, still proving that someone was alive on the death world. Ambassador Rebecca Lee stood at the viewport, watching the jungle rise up beneath them. She had read the reports. She knew what Verac 7 was supposed to be. A grave, a warning, a place where criminals went to be erased. She did not expect to find a village. The transport landed in a clearing that had been deliberately created. Cut trees formed a natural wall around a collection of structures that looked grown rather than built. Wooden walls reinforced with armor plates from creatures that should have been impossible to kill. Water systems. Storage buildings. Gardens. And the VHN. Rebecca froze at the top of the ramp. Dozens of massive predators moved through the village like it was the most natural thing in the world. They walked past humans without violence. Some of them carried tools. Some carried children. It was impossible. Everything she knew said this was impossible. A man walked toward the transport. He was sun-darkened and scarred, his body lean from hard living. But his eyes were sharp and clear. The eyes of a survivor. Ambassador, David Park said. Welcome to Verac 7. Rebecca struggled to find words. Captain Park, you were supposed to be dead. The council underestimated humans, David replied. And they underestimated the Ven. He led her through the village, explaining things she could barely understand. How he and Emma had survived the first weeks. How they had made contact with the Ven. How they had fought beside them against the marauders. How they had built something from nothing. The elder watched from a distance, her golden eyes following Rebecca's every movement. Other Ven gathered nearby, curious about the strange new creature that had fallen from the sky. They're intelligent, Rebecca said, understanding finally breaking through. Truly intelligent. More than intelligent, David said. They have culture, families, traditions passed down through generations. The council called them monsters because they never tried to understand them. Emma joined them at the center of the village. She had changed as much as David had. There was a confidence in her movements, a peace in her eyes that had not been there before. We're not the only ones anymore, she said. Other Venpacks have heard about what happened here. Some have come to join us. Others have sent messengers. Word is spreading. Rebecca's diplomatic training finally kicked in. She began to see the implications. Varak 7 was not just a death world anymore. It was a potential ally. The Ven were a species the galaxy had written off as savage, but they had proven capable of cooperation, of growth, of change, and humanity had been the bridge. The Council won't like this, Rebecca said carefully. You were supposed to be an example, a punishment. David smiled. It was the smile of a man who had stopped caring what the Council thought a long time ago. We are an example, he said. Just not the one they wanted. Humanity doesn't give up. We don't die when we're supposed to. We adapt. We build. We make friends out of enemies and turn death worlds into homes. He gestured at the village around them, at the Ven who had accepted him, at the life he had created from nothing but stubbornness and hope. This is what humans do, Ambassador. We survive. And then we make things better for everyone. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a communicator and made a call that would change galactic history. This is Ambassador Lee. I am on Varak 7. The human exiles are alive. More importantly, they have established first contact with a sapient species. I am recommending immediate reclassification of both the planet and the Ven. This is not a death world anymore. This is an embassy. The weeks that followed were chaos. Diplomats arrived. Scientists came to study. News spread across 100 worlds. The story of David Park, the human who had been sent to die and had refused, became known everywhere. But David did not care about fame. He cared about his family. The elder sat beside him one evening, watching the sun set through the jungle canopy. Her pack had grown to over 100 now, swelled by refugees and seekers from across the planet. The village had become a city. The Alliance had become a civilization. David pressed his forehead against hers, the way she had taught him. Respect, connection, love. She made a sound, low and rumbling. He did not need a translator to understand what it meant. Months later, when the first official human delegation arrived on Varak 7, they found David Park waiting for them. He was not an exile anymore. He was an ambassador. The first human representative to the Ven species. The man who had built a bridge between worlds. Behind him stood the elder and her pack. Beside him stood Emma, who had become the head of security for the growing colony. Around him stood a future that no one had thought possible. The delegation leader, a serious woman named Director Amy Stone, studied David with calculating eyes. The Council has officially pardoned you, she said. You can come home. Back to Earth. Back to human civilization. David looked at the jungle that had tried to kill him. At the Ven who had become his family. At the world he had bled for and fought for and loved. I am home, he said. The director nodded slowly. She had expected this answer. Then humanity will come to you, she said. Trade agreements. Cultural exchange. Military alliance. The Ven have a lot to offer the galaxy, and apparently, humans are the only ones they trust. David smiled. It was a warm smile now. A happy smile. The smile of a man who had found his place in the universe. That's what we do, he said. We make connections. We build bridges. We find family in the strangest places. The elder rumbled her agreement. She understood enough human speech now to follow conversations, though she rarely spoke herself. Her presence said everything that needed to be said. The death world had tested humanity and found them worthy. The predators had gained not prey, but partners. And the galaxy learned what humans had always known. There was no world too dangerous, no species too alien, no challenge too great for a human who refused to give up. David Park had been sent to Varak 7 to die. Instead, he had found a home, and that, more than anything else, was what it meant to be human.